Good evening. My name is Munish Gupta. I am the president of the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia based in Delhi. And welcome to another impactful webinar, a live virtual discussion on a book. We meet again as the world combats the COVID 19 pandemic. Delhi is literally shut down, and so is our club. That's why this is a totally virtual event. We do hope things get better very soon. This event is carried live on the FCC South Asia website and our social media handles, which include Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So if you are not able to see it on any one particular social media handle, please try the FCC South Asia website, Facebook, and YouTube. Please also send in your comments and questions for a Q&A session later in this program. Um, I would like to now introduce my guest today. First of all, a big welcome to Nitin Rakesh, who is a distinguished. Nitin, say hello. So people know Nitin. Of course, they can read your name, but still. But Nitin is a distinguished leader in the technology and financial services industries. He is the CEO and managing director of Emphasis. His career spans over 2 decades, leading large transnational operations and delivering transformative digital solutions to Fortune 500 companies. He's a computer science engineer, but Nitin's lifelong passion is in innovation and technology. And it's evident, I guess, throughout your career, Nitin. So, coupled with his deep domain expertise in banking, financial services, and insurance verticals, strong customer orientation, and an entrepreneurial mindset, he has been able to bring cutting edge offerings consistently to accelerate value creations for customers, shareholders, and employees. I'll also introduce our other special guest, Jerry Nguyen. Hi, Jerry. Jerry is an internationally renowned and award winning academician. He is currently the Lauder Professor Emeritus and Professor of Marketing at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. He joined Wharton in 1967 with a doctorate from Stanford and took an emeritus status in 2017. His pioneering research on organizational buying behavior, marketing, market segmentation, conjoint analysis, and marketing strategy has resulted in him being one of the most cited authors in marketing. In marketing, he's also a prolific writer. We can see that. I hope all those are your books in the back there, Jerry. A wonderful backdrop that you have. Having authored and edited 30 books and published over 300 articles and edited top marketing journals. Among his many innovations at Wharton, he led the development of Wharton Executive MBA, the Lauder Institute, and Wharton School Publishing. He also founded and directed for 3 decades the Wharton think tank, the Wharton SEI Center for Advanced Studies in Management, whose mission was to ensure the relevance of management research and education to the evolving needs of business and society in the 21st century. The reason we are here today is to talk about the book. The book is Transformation in Times of Crisis, and every crisis contains seeds of opportunity, as we all know. People have been talking about it, especially in the context of COVID 19. So, this book talks about applying 8 principles and an analytical framework to transform any crisis into opportunities. The 8 principles, which you will hear from both Nitin and Jerry, can create opportunities and value in the post pandemic world. Nitin and Jerry will both talk about the knowledge that they have culled out and how to actually optimize and use these 8 principles. Before I go to Nitin and to Jerry, let me introduce my very special colleagues here from the Foreign Correspondents Club and reputed international journalists who have joined us for this panel discussion. Danish Manzoor, he is the Asia editor for the Newsweek and the editorial director for the International Business Times. Simran Sodi, she is a well known senior journalist and also a contributor to the Khalij Times. Mr. P.M. Narayanan is a senior journalist, also has served on the committee, the governing committee of the Foreign Correspondents Club, and as treasurer, and he is the chief producer at ARD German Television. So, welcome everybody. And may I first start with Nitin. Nitin, tell us why this book and how it is very timely and contextual to the crisis that we are living in right now.
Good morning, Manish. Thank you all for being here today, and a great opportunity to speak to all of you. So, Manish, the book was actually born out of an observation that Jerry and I, kind of were discussing at an event in Wharton back in 2018, where it was pretty evident to us that a number of global enterprises were facing an unprecedented challenge with disruption. And contrary to popular belief that technology was creating disruption, our belief was that the consumer was driving disruption because consumer expectations had moved quite dramatically, due to, of course, their interactions with a lot of Silicon Valley companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook and so on. So I think this was an observation really was made that the pace of change is quickening. A lot of businesses have to reinvent their business model per se, put the customer in the middle of all of that. And of course, the technology intervention was really an enabler to that disruption, and of course was also available to every company to embrace. So, how do you use tech to get closer to your consumer? How do you reinvent your business model so it's not focused on your back office operations, but more focused on the customer and their experience? And the fact that every business was turning into a consumer business driven by experience, and the ability to actually personalize the services, of course, using digital tech. So that's how we started writing the book. And then, of course, all of us know that the great quickening happened with the onslaught of COVID about 2 years ago, and we saw everything we had talked about, everything we were observed in trying to create the book, was actually coming true in double take time. So that was the great big disruptive event, which ended up accelerating everything we had seen prior to the event as well. Right. So whether you look at adoption of all things digital. Every business turned into a digital business overnight. Telemedicine, education, services, banking, everything was really only available on a digital format. Even restaurants had to kind of go find a way to adopt digital tech. Museums had to do the same. So effectively, we crafted these 8 principles really as a guidebook, using very practical examples of companies that were embracing change, using the opportunity that the disruption provided to accelerate this change. And in a way, think of this as a playbook that any enterprise can use to accelerate and to embrace the availability of new tech, in a manner of speaking, to get closer to their consumers, and of course to obviously protect and grow their market share. So if I give you some examples of some of these principles that we're talking about, the very first one really is the foundational one, which is how do you change and challenge your own mental model? Because the more successful a business is, the harder it is for that business and the management to actually embrace that change, because they're successful, they have high free cash flow. Why do they really need to change? And we've seen this play out time and time again, all the way going back to the Kodak's example, to the retail example, to the media companies. I think it's very, very hard to disrupt your own business model, especially if you have been very successful, for many number of years, right? So I think that's kind of the foundation to with which we started the book. Of course, we'll talk about a little bit more about the other principles, but they talk about speeding up digital transformation, getting to know your consumers better to a point that you can predict their needs and create services that are highly personalized. How do you think about talent in this environment, and so on. So I'll take a pause there, but I think it was really all about change was happening. It got very, very quickly accelerated, and I think it's in a way funny that a communist, Lenin, actually made a very astute observation many years ago that has just played out so well in the last 2 years. Right? He said sometimes nothing happens for decades, and sometimes decades happen in weeks, and that's what we've lived through.
That's incredible. I hope you're safe quoting Lenin wherever you are, but that's good.
We are in
But
the
let
land
me,
of
let me,
opportunity. I think we
yeah,
are okay.
yeah, no, 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 it's no, but it's true. It's true. It's very true. Let me ask Jerry. Jerry, give us your take on the book and its relevance to today's times. But more importantly, since we are homing in on the 8 principles, let's talk about very briefly about the 8 principles so that people know, because that's really the subject of our discussion today.
Thank you. Um, let me only one comment on the kind of the first principle that Nitin start mentioning, the challenging your mental models, which I think is extremely relevant today because I hear too many companies and organizations that focus on going back to work. Going back to work is basically assuming that kind of okay, the pandemic is almost over. or hopefully will be over soon, and we can just go back to life before. I think that's a fallacy. I think everyone has to realize we are not going back to the way it was before the pandemic. Um, everything that happened during the pandemic, work from home, e-learning, e-commerce, the reliance of Zoom, what we're doing now, telemedicine, you name it, all of these are going to stay. They're not going away. They were successful. There's successful ways of dealing with the crisis. That's going to be part of the new reality. So I think it's absolutely critical for everyone on this call to realize that we have to change. We cannot just go back to the old status quo. It's a new reality, and we have to adjust. And our other principles really help in directing us toward this new reality. The principle two was actually to reimagine and reinvent the approach to customer and stakeholders. It's critical when you think about purpose-based organizations today, when people are talking about purpose and the shift away from the traditional shareholder orientation to a stakeholder orientation. It's a part of the new reality, and we're suggesting ways of doing it. Incidentally, as we're going through all the principles, I'll go very briefly over them so we can start focusing on the one that you would like us to discuss. Keep in mind, what we're doing in the book is we discuss the principle, we present some examples, showing live examples how successful companies are using this principle. We provide tools that you can use to try to help you implement the principles. And we provide a framework that you can adjust so you as an organization can then decide how to take these principles and integrate them in your transformation strategy. The third principle we have is to speed up digital transformation and design for personalization and scale. Consumers expect personalized services. They don't buy just product as they used to do. Basically, the consumer today is looking for real-time personalized experience. How do you create it? The fourth principle is to reinvent the talent strategy and embrace open innovation. Open innovation is key. The success of open innovation is beyond description. You can basically develop it. Typically used in the early application were in the technology side, where you can develop software and other solution 4 to 5 times faster and 8 to 10 times cheaper if you're going through open innovation. And the movement now is toward open talent, which is dramatically changing the traditional models of talent. The fifth principle is primarily to seize the need to speed and design for agility, adjacencies, and adaptability. Speed is the new currency, and we have to make sure that we know how to do it. The sixth principle focus on innovate, then experiment, experiment, experiment. Our philosophy is experimentation is absolutely critical. The only way to learn and to improve what you're doing is through continuous experimentation. Every one of the leading companies that we kind of all admire, Amazon, Google, the other, they're doing thousands of experiments a day. Everything they do is based on experimentation. But yet so many companies still don't rely on experimentation. The seventh principle is to redraw your timeline and build a portfolio of initiatives across all innovation horizon. You cannot just build for today, but you have to think about the future as well, and how do you start designing new initiative and experiments to try to capture all innovation horizon. And the final, the eighth principle is to deploy idealized design. And the idea there is that we don't go with the traditional approach where we were in the past and how do we move forward. Start creating a new dream. Where would you like to be? Design of the dream, the idealized design, and then work backward. It's called backward planning, backward to where you are now, and then design the organizational architecture and network orchestration that will allow you to achieve your dream. So these are the principles. They're all interrelated, and I would love to elaborate on any of them that you would like us to discuss.
Well, thank you, Jerry. Let me ask Danish to take it from here and quiz our two great authors.
Right. Thank you, Monish. So to Jerry and Nitin, I think your journey had begun about writing this book right from disruption. and then it also landed into the right in the middle of the crisis, right? So how you started off writing this book, in between we had a pandemic that struck, and then it changed course, it adapted itself, and then I think what your book is all about, you've already gone through that process while changing the overall intention of how the book was supposed to be and where it is now, right? Now, I will ask you something around a very interesting thing, which is about company cultures and not about the end user. Because as somebody who is currently working at the intersection of, see, an entrepreneurship, tech, editorial, and so many other things, including marketing, of course, the readers, which are the consumers in our case. Company culture post-COVID, the whole dynamics and the definitions have changed. When we had staffers or people or colleagues within the company from various different departments, be it technology, the human resources, it's marketing, it's product, or editorial in our case, it was very easy to sort of convey things on the floor to people, and then we moved to the Zoom model, where it initially took a huge hit. Like it was amazing because suddenly we saw the efficiency levels of our tech team going up by 45%. We actually measured it in the first month. But the second month onwards, suddenly it started taking a dip. The fatigue factor set in. Now, where does your understanding, and while writing this book, I think Principle 4 perhaps deals with this. I haven't gone very deep into it. So where does that fit in the present day? Now, how do entrepreneurs, because before you go to the external public, you have to fix things inside, right? Before you focus on the consumer, you have to focus on what you're offering to consumer and who are the gears in your machine that are actually doing it for the consumers. So what's your take on this? Both Nitin and Jerry, you can both jump in.
Sure. So, Danish, I can give you a quick take. I think you're absolutely right. The book went through its own transformation while we were in the middle of writing it. So it was a living example of how to be agile, how to be nimble, and of course have an open mind. And it wasn't so easy to junk a lot of the work that we had already done. We were actually almost ready to publish. We had the first manuscript done. So I think we had to redo a lot of the work. But important realization was that everything we were talking about in the book pre-COVID was really happening in front of our eyes. So we had to pivot the book and actually include the examples from how this was the big accelerant. So I think that's a very astute observation. So absolutely, it was an interesting process, at least for me, because in business we don't make these pivots, so easy. But having gone through that pivot, I think it's we're living examples of how to apply some of these principles to our own efforts. In terms of your question around, the new normal or the new abnormal, I think Jerry referenced it as well. Let me first share a funny story. About 6 or 9 months ago, as the wave 2, subsided in the US, there was a lot of chatter, and Jerry referenced to it, around bringing people back into the office, and some, really influential, Fortune 50 CEOs started talking about return to work, and the fact that they now expect people to return to work. What they really meant was bringing them back to the physical offices that they had all over the country. And I think there was a little bit of a furor because the very first question a lot of the employees asked were, what do you mean return to work? We have been working for the last 20 months. So I think they had to then do a little bit of a recalibration and say, okay, what they really meant was return to office. And I think that's the reason why I'm sharing that story is because that's kind of the mental model shift a lot of these CEOs haven't really made, because in their minds, unless you see people in the office on the floor, they're not really working. And I think you referenced it to yourself that you saw productivity, improve in the first month, and then of course it started dipping because of the fatigue. I think as employers, as entrepreneurs, as managers, as leaders, we have to accept that the world has changed forever when it comes to the employer-employee relationship and what employees will expect, especially knowledge workers who don't really need to be in a physical location, unlike a factory or frontline workers. And I think even though the number of workers is in the knowledge economy, in any economy is pretty significant, it's not 100%. But it is a reality that relationship has changed forever. So it's really up to us to redraw what that engagement model will look like. How will you engage these employees that are remote? It's really going to be a hybrid world. We actually at Emphasis, we embraced a hybrid first model, already in our employee ecosystem. What that really means is you don't need to be in the office 5 days a week. It really depends on, you can work from anywhere, but you need to be in the office to collaborate. So that's kind of the way we've thought about it. Work from anywhere, collaborate in the office. We're turning a lot of our physical office infrastructure into collaboration workspaces, design studios, solution studios, proof of concepts. You can do workshops, you can meet clients, you can meet your own teams, you can do offsites. And I've seen this play out in our New York office, where as we opened the office, of course it's shut now again for the current environment, but it was open for about 6 months in the second half of 2021. People weren't coming to the office every day to work, but they were coming to the office to do offsites. And that's kind of a good way to think about what their infrastructure will be used for. Having said that, day-to-day interactions, you talked about the interaction with your staff, whether it's editorial, whether it's production, you will have to find a way to do this in a manner that it's collaborative using tech and collaboration work tools. So I think thinking about some long-term investment in those collaboration workspaces that can be virtual. And of course, you can convert the thinking into a hybrid mode, so you can seamlessly go between virtual and physical. But that's the way I think the world will continue to operate and move. We do talk a little bit about the open talent, infrastructure in Principle 4, which is really all about even the way you think about having talent doesn't necessarily have to be full-time employees. You can actually leverage the gig economy that is opening up for talent in almost every industry. I think especially in your business, it's been done before, but it's actually become a lot more prevalent right now for people to work in a gig manner, which means you crowdsource a lot of your ideas, you crowdsource design, you crowdsource production, and so on. Jerry, you're on mute.
Jerry, yeah.
No, I think I'm okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Yeah, I'm. Let me only kind of add to what Nitin said. We have to realize that there is a change in a deep change in corporate culture due to what's happening in society. Just think about the movement toward diversity, inclusion, and equity. And the focus of almost every organization on this, and appointing a chief diversity, inclusion, and equity. And it adds a new dimension that a lot of organizations did not have before. And but we're going through transformation because there is a real risk that this position will now become the decision maker for many decisions, because most people in the organization are afraid of making a decision before they get the blessing of the chief diversity, inclusion, and equity. And that's unhealthy. I think their voice should be heard. They should definitely affect the decision of the corporation, but they cannot be the deciders. And I think we're going through transformation. Most organizations are going through this transformation of internal culture and values and how to deal with some of the changes in society. I think the change that Nitin mentioned at the end, which is the incorporation of open talent as part of the talent equation, and realizing that it's not only the hiring and developing and retaining the talent, but also how do you access the open talent which is available today and take advantage of this and integrate them with the same corporate culture and values that you have. I think it's really becoming quite critical. So I think we'll see a major continuous transformation of corporate cultures. A lot of organizations struggle with this. And we have to realize that the world is moving toward an omni-channel world. The same way that consumers expect a seamless experience online and offline, employees, workers, and others should realize that we are in this hybrid world now. And what are the implications? And huge implication to space design and architecture and office structures. So I think that you touched by starting us on the corporate culture was one of the key areas that companies have, and any organization, not only companies, any organization have to think about, and how to create this new balance and make sure that we are flexible and ready to change as we proceed, because we are learning every day. And the key to this will be continuous experimentation with different approaches.
Right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Nitin. Monish, you can come in here. I think I do have one more question, but I think I'll take it up later.
Yeah, let me move to Simran. Simran, your thoughts, your questions?
Yeah, so I went through the 8 principles, and the one thing that I was a little curious about, would you say that these 8 principles apply to every country? Because if you look at India, and if you look at a lot of countries in Africa, the problem is, we have referred to the vaccine inequality. I would say in India, we also have a technology inequality. The kind of technology I can access, for example, my cook can't access. So I was also reading the examples you have given, for example, Netflix, and I thought that was very interesting because we have seen this happening in India. A lot of movies which were going to be released in big theaters, like 83, for example, is now going to come on Netflix. But someone like me who has access to technology, who is a subscriber to Netflix and Amazon, can watch it. But what about a large majority of people in India and I think globally also who don't have access to this technology? So, how are we going to fit them into this post pandemic world, which I think is also becoming very strongly dependent on technology, and which I think in turn leads to also a world where people who, like us, who have access to technology, will stand to gain compared to people who don't have access to technology. For example, a lot of students in India, for example, ever since classes have gone online, I have seen students not having mobile phones is translating into a lack of education. So I'm a little worried as to how we are going to deal with this technology inequality, which is what I'm calling for, lack of a better word. So if I could just understand that a little more.
Jerry, you want to go ahead?
I can start. I think you're raising a huge issue. I think it's beyond technology. I think it's you're talking actually about the increased divide in all societies, and it's not only in India and Africa. Look at the divide within the U.S. Between the have and have not, the digital divide. The even more disturbing for many is the ideological divide in the U.S. today. And that's something that has to be addressed. The specific one that you're focusing on, I think, will require both advances in technology towards cheaper, more accessible technological devices that will have access to the internet. And a lot of people are working on this. I think it will require major efforts by governments to try to realize that you cannot leave significant parts of the population behind, and you have to provide them the access. Access to the internet today is as critical as access to clear water and air. And I think governments have to start realizing this. And I think businesses have a huge role in trying to help and to realize the opportunities. There is huge opportunities at the bottom of the pyramid if you're going back to this paradigm. And the entrepreneurs that will realize this and take advantage of this will be the one who will score big in the next round. So I think we have to realize this and have to address it. But I look at this as opportunity to everyone involved.
Yeah, I think if I can just add a couple of points to that, Simran, I think the flip side of the question that you asked me is the counter argument that while you're talking about the tech divide, I think tech is also the best way to democratize access to information and services. Just like you talked about your cook not having access to Netflix, for example. When I was in India a month ago, I had to actually borrow my driver's Google Pay account to pay for something that I couldn't pay for in cash, right? So, and then I realized that the penetration of digital payments in India is actually far exceeded anything else that I would have imagined in a time frame that was unimaginable even 2 years ago, right? So I think it's also becoming a very, very quick leveler because a lot of the same tech is available at the touch of a button, whether you're using a fancy iPhone Pro Max which costs $1,500 or a low-end Android device that costs $50, right? So I think while it seems like a digital divide, but I think it's quite the contrary. It is actually a great leveler because it democratizes access. We've seen that play out actually in the education system in the US in the last 18 months because Chromebooks have become the go-to devices for public schools to hand out to the kids for education. Not only are they actually getting classroom instructions, but they're also starting to become huge consumers. And there's a research that was done recently by actually somebody who builds these Chromebooks. The consumption of data through Chromebooks actually is 5 times higher outside of the classrooms than actually during the classroom instruction hours. So I think it's becoming a great leveler as well. Of course, like all things, it takes time to percolate down. But example after example, think about the access of information that's available today to the sellers of goods that had 5 intermediaries. So the disintermediation opportunity that comes with availability of information and knowledge is a good example of how the true power actually goes to the end consumer because of the same tech. So I think that there is a glass half full, half empty type of syndrome here, but I'm really trying to show you why actually this will become the best way to equalize many of those things that you're talking about.
Great. TM?
Yes, very, very interesting. I'll go with Nitin in that aspect. I would like to ask one specific thing. Of course, disruption has been happening, and then this COVID kind of give a momentum to that. But yes, this open talent, this is something I'm really very interested in. Actually, we have produced a kind of infrastructure to create talent pools across the world, universities, schools, education, other things. Now we are going to have kind of revolving door in which talents can come and go. And this kind of disruption, how the corporate infrastructure is going to handle this, how difficult it is.
Yeah, I think PM, that is kind of talks back to the comment I made earlier, which is that the employer-employee relationship has changed forever. Due to the last 18 months. Not only are you going to have to reimagine the way to engage employees, you'll also have to reimagine your entire employee value proposition. You have to reimagine what you stand for as a company, because unless you engage them, with a broader purpose, this old-fashioned way of running mission and vision will actually not touch these employees, especially the new Gen Z, employee base. They're also very wary of doing full-time 9 to 5 type of jobs. So you have to find a way to engage them in a manner that we can actually leverage that talent without necessarily having to straitjacket them in the way we were used to. One good example of this is open talent, which is, can you actually, instead of going out and hiring these employees to work for you 8 hours a day, having the same rules apply to all employees, can you actually start carving out bundles of work that you can use knowledge workers for, and you pay them for that bundle of work to be delivered? One very good example of this is Hackathon Mindset. And if you look at a company like NASA, and we've talked about it quite extensively in the book as to how they've actually reinvented their knowledge ecosystem, their ecosystem for bringing in open innovation and open talent. Anybody that they want to hire, they could hire, because they have 14,000 rocket scientists that work for NASA. But they very routinely, for many of their missions and programs, they actually carve out problems to the open domain and invite ideas and challenges. In a way, kind of run hackathons for many design problems, for many science issues that they're dealing with, whether it is and in almost every major NASA program, you will actually see over 100 to 200,000 people actually participate in these hackathons. So and they haven't been doing it just in the last 2 years. They've been doing it for many years together. So that's a great way to think about how do you augment your own employee pool with some open innovation and open talent mindset, where you actually create the opportunity and the platform for people to come in and play a role in your programs, in your advancement. We know of a number of companies that are actually carving out bundles of software development into the same concept as well. There are companies like Topcoder that do the same. Even at Emphasis, we've actually experimented with this in the last 18 months, and we had a client that had a malware attack. We needed 200 people over a weekend to patch their servers and get them up and running before the start of the next week. Impossible to hire 200 people and put them on the project in that particular short time frame. So we actually carved it out into an open talent ecosystem within the company. So open it to all 30,000 employees, and we were able to create 200 people worth of man hours within that weekend to get this done. So I think it's suddenly opened our eyes to the fact that this is something that we can very much bake into our supply chain as well.
That's a great point. If I may just continue for a minute on the NASA example, because this requires rethinking what is an organization. NASA does not think of itself as 17,000 employees. They think of themselves as having 1 million plus people part of their network. And how do they manage the 1 million plus people in their network, 1 million that grows because open talent is continuously growing and it's all over the world and it's dynamic. So it's a rethinking what is an organization and what is your role as an executive? How do you become the network orchestrator of the different talent? Because the open talent and open innovation is not only in the software development area, it applies in all domains and every single decision, every function of the organization. And you have to take this into account. So, for example, there was a company established, Victor and Spoils, a few years back, that had in the advertising area and had over 7,000, almost overnight, they were able to create a network of over 7,000 creatives on all over the world who were able to solve any advertising challenges a company had. So it really requires going back to our principle one of challenging the malls and thinking, what is an organization? And how do you redefine the organization to capture in it the opportunities that open talent provides you?
And just one last point, I think there's a great example of how open talent has actually come to bear. Think of all open source software. That's the world's biggest experiment in open talent and open innovation. To a point that a company that was as control oriented as Microsoft ended up going and buying GitHub. You could not have imagined that 5 years ago.
Very true, very true. All of you guys were stealing all the good conversations, so I have to now come in here. But listen, this is incredible. I mean, we've all been confined to our spaces, whether at work or at home, during the last couple of years, and it has compelled us to think. And I think those 8 pointers that you give, or the 8 principles, are definitely valid. And I was wondering how many of those are actually relevant to us in the media, and I find a lot of them relevant to us in the media. And my biggest question, thinking about everything that all of you have discussed so far, was, and then this is as much a comment and a question to my colleagues here as to both of you, Nitin and Jerry, is we all work for specialized media. My company sort of does programming for the Indian diaspora. Danish is doing International Business Times, reporting at, editor for Newsweek. Simran writes for the Middle East in a column and covers international events. PM has the audiences in Germany, but by virtue of what Germany thinks, a global scenario. But with what's happening out there, and you're talking about open pools, open talents, I think social media and citizen journalism is going to take over and go through the roof and will not stop at where it is today. And I wonder what that transformation is going to cause and lead and do. And I know, Danish, that you've been sort of involved in creating and pushing the envelope on some new things. Where do you see this going? And once you talk, then I'd like Jerry and Nitin and then Simran and PM to comment on it.
Right. So, Munish, I think what you mentioned in terms of media, when it comes to social media and the fear that citizen journalism may just take over. So, I think what differentiated traditional media from any other source of information, or let's call it verified information, was the fact that it was usually channelized through gatekeepers. And in what we had discussed, that in fact the principle 7, which I'm just looking for in the book in front of me, it talks about seize the need for speed. I think the same need for speed also took over media by a storm. And in this mad rush of breaking news, we ended up as journalists breaking the news itself, right? So in this entire context, how I see, will social media take over? I doubt, because until and unless we address the credibility deficit that the media has at this point of time taken upon itself globally, not just in India. In America, you've got some people talking about this is the left leaning, this is the right wing media, right? So you've got Breitbart News, you've got so many news sources. You've got Trump talking about New York Times and other news sources, and sort of saying all bad things about them because they do not subscribe to their ideology, or they report not in sync with what they expect. Similarly, in India as well, we've got a similar situation going on. So unless and until there was a need to fix something, I don't think the need to change arises. So clearly, it is the time that media owners, editors, journalists, technologists, everybody, they all have to come together and then have what we call in India as a manthan on this, on what needs to be done, what is the way forward. From when it comes to technology, I think most media companies already are adopting it. They are sort of, say, a print media company now is a multimedia company. A broadcast media company now is also a multimedia company, is also on social media, does also have presence on various other platforms as well, which was earlier unheard of. So media is also going through a metamorphosis at this point of time from where I see it. Like in our case, I not only deal with editorial what any other editor usually would do, but I work at the intersection of tech, product, and all of these things. So, usually my one conversation in the morning begins with the tech team to see what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. And the other conversation suddenly is about the product. And the third one is about, okay, now what do we do about how do we market this product and how do we monetize this, right? How do we fix the business models of the media at this juncture, right? So these are, I think, a lot of open-ended conversations, and each conversation can take an hour at least if we go deeper into it. But I think as far as your question goes, I don't think there's a threat to it. But yes, of course, if the media does not change in time, is what I believe, if we don't fix the primary credibility factor, I think it's going to be a tough road up ahead.
Can I pick up on this for a minute? I think
Yes,
the point of credibility is really critical. And let me suggest one other element here, and this is artificial intelligence. I think AI is going to be the game changer. We already have incidents of automated journalism using AI to report on stories. And I think the difference will be when every individual will have a smartphone in their pocket that has an AI system built in. So when they have questions, they're not just getting Google responses, which is whatever kind of the Google rules provide you the information on, but they'll have verified information. Imagine like a Watson type system that was used in Sloan Kettering and other places, and you'll be able to get verified information, because the lack of credibility of the media is really a huge, huge issue. So I think other than trying to have more ethical journalists, whether they are the full-time journalists or the population at large that are becoming journalists, look what's happening at Facebook in terms of the involvement of the billions of people on Facebook who are providing the news. I think this combination with AI is going to be the game changer, and probably the media, and especially journalists, is going to be one of the areas that are going through the most dramatic changes in today's environment.
Right. So, Jerry, I think just to validate what you just said further, let me add to this. The call I was mentioning that I was on right before this one dealt with something very similar. So in my company, we do have an AI team as well. We have the AIML team right now is working on something very similar. Two things. One was social media automation, which we have already deployed and it's working. So a social media team of around 27 people, which we used to have globally earlier, now is reduced to 2 at this juncture. And my AIML engines are able to execute things, I think, with 200%, if not more, efficiency. And the error elements have sort of completely gone out. There's no tagging the wrong Nitin or a wrong Jerry or using the wrong hashtag anymore. So that's happening for sure. And also in terms of when you said article writing, the AI algorithms are already there. There are use cases which are there. And in fact, we have almost finalized working on one at our end, which is sort of giving us a result of around 80% accuracy, which is huge in terms of speed and agility as well, because we will be able to, in an atmosphere of breaking news, we would be able to sort of come up with an article 80% faster than anybody else, and then have the editorial insight on top of it to ensure that system-generated errors are eradicated in that process. So there you go, Nitin.
I think, Ganesh, it's great that you're embracing a lot of the same thinking that Jerry was talking about. I'm going to push a little bit further because I think anything centralized will face a revolt from Gen Z, whether it is social media, whether it is finance, whether it is any form of control. So, in addition to the AI ML team, I would actually recommend you actually hire a blockchain team, because whether we like it or not, it will get decentralized and there will not be a central control. Whether it is in 3 years or 5 years, I'm not smart enough to predict, but all I can tell you is it'll happen faster than we think. So this wave of decentralization, of central controls, people don't like RBI governor or Fed governor making a decision on what should happen to the economy. Hence, you will see this decentralization of finance through some form of a crypto revolution. Now, I'm not saying that Bitcoin will become, will overtake rupee or dollar, but I mean that's a oversimplification of what's going on in the DeFi space. But I think this wave of DeFi will happen in almost every part of the economy as we see it, and I think there are already very active, very large initiatives underway with new protocols that will actually attack almost every part of the value chain. So I think that I would just urge you to start thinking about how that has an impact on your business and your business model, in addition to
Right. So Nitin, happy to tell you that my bio on all my social media platforms, it clearly says it's AI and ML for AI, ML, and blockchain for media. So I think we are on the same page with respect to that, because I think blockchain does fix a lot of issues that the media faces at this juncture, right from decentralization, also the element of accountability and credibility. So all of those elements can be brought in, and tokenizing of a lot of things within the media. In fact, even the business models can be fixed as well. But again, it is not easy. The agility, because if you are the first player, first mover advantage, unless you've got like billions of dollars in funding, or you just get lucky, you're just there in the right time, right place, you have the technology and you're able to push it, and the world is willing and ready to receive it, just like YouTube, for instance, right? It was just there in time, because before that there were so many other video platforms, but they could do not much. They sort of went flat-faced, right? So yeah, interesting insight. And one question which I have here, guys, is you mentioned about experiment, and your principle 6, right? Innovate and experiment. So there's one thing when companies the technology arm of our companies, when we see it, that when we're working on a particular solution, usually when you begin with the solution, you think, okay, this is how it's going to shape up, and eventually a product will come out of it, right? And ultimately, by the end of a year, it takes an entirely different shape, and there arises a time when you have to take a decision. Do you completely drop now what you've done in the past 1 year, or do you now continue and then sort of make a slight detour in your existing ecosystem of what you've done so far, and then fix it as per the current need? So what do you do in those cases?
Jerry, you want to take that one?
Well, I think you have to do the multiple things. One is be ready to flip at any moment. That's what we did with the book. We had a book which was designed for how can legacy companies survive. And when the pandemic started, we said, wait a minute, all our principles apply to, the new crisis. Why would we flip? So I think you should be ready to flip. And I think you should try to avoid multi-year experiments. Try to do them shorter. Try to break them down into small experiments. I think the people forgot when they started introducing Agile, there was a great idea behind Agile, which was, let's try to design the Agile in a way that within a short period of time, let's say 10 weeks, you can have results that people will be willing to pay for. So you have actually value at the end. And design continuous experiments around this and continue as fast as you can. And if it doesn't work, kill it and move to something else. So I would suggest that you change orientation, be ready to flip at any time, to change the very long processes into shorter one, and continuously develop. With technology today, you can actually do so much more in terms of prototypes and prototype testing, and also start incorporating the clients, the customers in your design. Let them be part of the design process. Don't look at it as separate. I have to develop things internally and then I'll take them to the world. Bring the world to you. To what extent the customers can engage with you as co-developers. That's the ultimate customer engagement if they are becoming as part of the co-developers. So I think you have to do all of these, because the old way of doing things, the kind of the traditional funnel approach, just doesn't work.
Let me come in here. Let me go back to what Simran was saying, and I kind of agree that, look, the biggest revolution, which predated this pandemic, and it's probably hastened, the pandemic has hastened it, is digital transformation. And digital transformation is a very wide ranging, all encompassing subject. There are so many angles to it. I mean, you talk about AI, ML, AR, VR, it's endless. I mean, and how do you do that? But very importantly, you see, unless the governments and the private sector, in some sort of a private public partnership model, work together to bridge that divide between the haves and the have nots, whether it's country like India, or as Jerry said, even the big developed countries. Unless those things happen, and somehow connectivity reaches the last mile, all the talk will remain talk. We will not be involving the society as a whole. But that's a comment I wanted to make. I will come back to Simran. Simran, what's in the last 2 years with digital transformation, with these 8 principles that we are talking about, transformation in times of crisis? You as an independent journalist, what's been your take on how things have affected media, particularly you as a columnist writer?
Um, I would say that there's been advantages and there's been disadvantages. I think the biggest advantage is that because of the pandemic, I've been locked here in Delhi, but I've been able to write for global editions because I have access to technology. I've been able to reach out to people on, say, WhatsApp, and I've been able to connect via email. So I think that has been the good part. But I, as a an old fashioned journalist, someone who started her career in print media, where we were still making pages and cutting them out with scissors, I also realized that there is something which is being lost, and that is the stories of uh, the rural India, I think countries in the world which do not, I again go back to my point, which do not have access to technology. So I think I think it's a 50-50 field. For a lot of reasons, I think technology has made the media also more credible. I look at Twitter and I see the responses to a lot of stories, and I'm very surprised at how smart the public is. Sometimes you put out a story and you think, oh, this is a really good story, and then I scroll down, I see what people are writing, and I'm sometimes very amused at seeing how they have looked at the story in a very entirely different fashion. So I think for me, technology has also helped in the sense that as a journalist, as an independent journalist, when I do a story, the response that I am getting, the feedback I'm getting is much more instantaneous. It is also helping us, I think, as journalists to be more credible, to be more, to understand that the public is actually very smart. But also, I feel that somewhere, as Manish, you said, the government has to step in. Somewhere we have to make sure that the stories of rural India, for example, the stories that are taking place in the villages of India or in the remote areas of Africa, or it could be any part of the world, it could even be the United States, it could be Hawaii, any part of the world where we have people, we don't want to miss out stories as a journalist. I think that is my point. Where we have technology, we are getting better stories. We are getting better responses. Twitter, Facebook, the response is instantaneous. Oh, I don't like what you wrote. This is not how it should be. Good, very good. But what about people whose stories are getting marginalized? I think that for me is my concern as a journalist, as an independent journalist today, that while I'm able to put across a certain perspective because I have access to things, I'm acutely aware of the perspective that we are losing every day because some of us are getting lost behind. And that remains a huge concern for me. And again, what Manish said, I think somewhere we'll have to ask the governments to step in. We have to bring people at par in technology. And that will help in making the media also, I believe, more credible because when you write a story and you see on Twitter, 50 people will respond and say, oh, this is wrong, this is right. So imagine more people having access to technology and people in the villages then telling you, oh, we need clean water. So maybe that is the big story on India. Are we improving the access to clean water in India? So is that the main story in India? Not maybe what I think sitting in Delhi with a very world view, which might be different uh, from the viewpoint of the people who live in villages and who haven't had access the way we've had it. So I think that that remains my concern throughout. Though I agree with Nitin that this is making us more democratic technology. This is opening up avenues which we must welcome. But again, I go back to the fact as a somewhat of a socialist that we have to get everyone on the same line before we move on.
Before anybody else comments, I just want to quickly touch upon another issue is that, look, times are changing, things are changing very fast. Technology pushes the envelope. Of course, I agree with Simran, and probably all of us agree that, technology is making us more ethical, more credible, whether it's a business or it's media, because whatever we do and whatever we put out is subject to comments, questions, inspection, introspection, whatever. Uh, what's you talked about a hybrid model. Before I come to you, Nitin and Jerry, I want to ask PM. Um, you work with a large crew in India, of television, your company, television and radio reporters. How is hybrid? Have you been able to adapt and adopt the hybrid, and how does it work for you?
Yeah, it's a great extent we have been adapting for the last few years. Especially, I remember I started television with the big cameras and everything, but now it's all gone. It's a one-member crew. You can go out, you can shoot, you can edit, you can upload, you can watch back the story which you have done in same mobile unit. So the thing is that this is a great leveler. What Nitin says is, I absolutely agree with that. This is a great leveler. A lot of potential is there, and it's going to penetrate into the system slowly, steadily, and we have to live with it. And apart from that, I just wanted to add one more point in the sense that in journalism, my feeling is that only the reporting element has kind of gone haywire in the sense that there are thousands of reporters in the field. But if you are a good journalist, if you can put the report, the information which you get in context, still you can survive in the system. This is what my feeling about the journalism aspect. But I just wanted to ask something about Jerry, about the issue of real time personal experience. So this is something that we miss in this internet world. So how do you manage this aspect of the whole changes which we are going through?
I think it's a great question because I think increasingly consumer really want to share their real time personalized experience, and there are two ways of doing it. One is, and that's part of the discussion that we have under personalization at scale in the book. One is like if you have enough data on the consumer, you can provide them the solution that will be much more personalized. Think about Netflix and how they kind of target the movies that you're going to watch because they have tons of data on you, on your preference and everything else. So they could do it. The other approach is companies that will provide the consumer a platform that will allow the consumer to customize and personalize their own offering. And I think we'll see a continued trend in both of these areas, improvement both in the data you have about consumers that will allow you to personalize for them based on the data you have and the intelligence you have. And increasingly with AI, you'll be able to do it even better. And at the same time, to develop platforms that will allow consumers to personalize the services that they need. So I think that's part of the trend that we see that we'll probably see increased development and innovation in the near future.
Thank you.
Uh, finally, we talked about economy. It's the economy of the entire world, not just of any one country in particular, has taken a hit. Economies that, people at home, people in small businesses, big and large companies. everybody's crying out loud for what's going to happen. And then we see reports who's going to come back, how fast are they going to rise back, which country is going to do better than the other. World Bank released a report, I think yesterday, which talked about India coming back faster and sooner. uh, it's all about digital transformation, isn't it? And at the end of the day, it's all about how fast, how quickly we can adopt, adapt, and move towards picking and using the right solutions. So, what do you think in this economic? I mean, in this juggernaut of how and what will make which economy revive? uh, what do you two say? I mean, we're coming to the end of our 1 hour discussion here. What would you two say? Where our economy is headed? Whether it's individual or home or small businesses or countries, and what's really going to make things move and how fast?
So, Manish, I think you covered it well. I'll just summarize by saying that the digital India economy is probably going to be $1 trillion by 2025. And I think that itself will give you a pretty strong springboard to bring along almost every other part of the economy with it. So I think this is probably, in hindsight, we will look back at 2020, 2021 and say what a pivotal moment it was for many countries, and especially countries like India that are actually taking a leap out of the digital playbook and embracing it, whether it is almost in every part of the business and economy as you see it, right? Every supply chain, make in India, digital payments, almost every part of the value chain is right now getting digitized. So I think it's a very again, if you zoom out and if you're going to try to take a slightly long view, this is probably the best and the biggest pivot that we will witness in our lifetimes on at a scale that has never been done with 1.3, 1.4 billion people.
Let
Jackie,
me.
any thoughts?
I agree with Nitin. I think that let me try to conclude with quick points. One, we have seen enormous accomplishment in terms of the speed of change. It's commonly said that what would have taken 10 years in development, whether it's e-commerce, e-learning, any one of these areas, took 3 months. So think about the time, how fast we're able to do it. If we can continue with this speed of change in the future, I think we'll be able to kind of get to the right type solutions. At the same time, we have to combine it with the finding that McKinsey came, where they've been doing continuous studies on consumers around the world. And one of the key findings is that increasingly consumers are presenting the question of reflection. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we spending the way we do? Why are we buying certain things? Do we really need them? And I think it's time for reflection for individuals, organizations, government to try to reflect, why are we doing certain things and do we really have to do it? So to use the crisis as opportunity not only to leverage the trends, but also to reflect and challenge the fundamental mental models that we had before, because it might be that some of our old mental models and approaches were wrong, were the wrong ones. How do we solve them? So, and the third point I would say and conclude with is you need leaders with courage to act. It's not enough just to talk about this, but you have to have the courage to act. Because if you will not have the courage, the tendency, the temptation just to go back to the old status quo is too strong. So you need to have the conviction and the courage to act.
Well, unless Simran and PM, you have something to say very quickly, I'm going to conclude. Anything, PM, Simran? Yeah. Well, I think we were already on the brink of a huge change before the pandemic set in. And I think the pandemic has only hastened and accelerated that change. I hope it drives sense into the minds of everybody, private entrepreneurs, thinkers, and the governments, everybody alike, to move things in the right direction. Whether it's socialist or not, whether you quote Marx or Simran says socialism, but I just feel the inequities of all kinds must now dissolve and dissipate as we move into new times and a new world order, particularly with digital transformation. In my opinion, the way I have seen and traveled the world and reported on it, Digital transformation is the only key to socio-economic impact development if we want to bring in shared prosperity. And I think, if anything, COVID-19 has finally opened our eyes to it. Everything around us has changed, and like you said, changed largely for the better. It's pushed us to change. So thank you very much, both of you, for bringing this book to us, Transformation in Time of Crisis. We congratulate both Nitin and Jerry for this lovely book. And I would like to also particularly thank my panelist, Danish. He had to leave. He had another appointment. And Simran Sodi, as well as PM Narayanan, and for joining me here. This has been a pleasure. Please keep coming back and bring us interesting subjects. We are again in almost a lockdown. Hope we don't stay with it too long. It's good to be a part of the physical, real world. As much as I love the virtual world and hybrid, I want to travel again. I want to touch, feel, see, believe, move around, eat the foods. I can't just order online every day.
Real
So
personal
with those
experience.
words, yeah, with those good words, thank you very much. I also want to thank all the people who have watched us online live. I know it's not easy; they've been busy. Most of our colleagues and some are down with people sick at home, but we've had a very good attendance. We will talk about it later. But thank you from the US, thank you from India, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
Nitin.
very
Thank you,
much.
Jerry. Thanks. Thanks.